You're listening to episode 99, Cat Story, Chronic Illness as a Teenager. Hello, my friends. I'm so happy that you're here today, and I get to introduce you to Kat Harrison, who is actually not a parent of a child with an illness. She was the child and still is now an adult with a chronic illness. And I think it's important for sometimes us to change our perspective a little bit and actually hear what the patient has to say. So Kat is amazing. She is the community manager at the Mighty. And then she has also written 2 children's books, Migraine and Mia and Surgery on Sunday, both are which incredibly creative. She's just such a creative spirit, but she gets really honest with us about what it was like being a teenager in the hospital and what her parents did that worked really well, maybe what could have been done differently, and then how to tackle supporting teens. So parents out there, if you've got tweens and teens and you're wondering how do I connect with them, especially if they're dealing with a chronic illness and transitioning to adult care, this is a really helpful episode. And I'm just so grateful to Kat that you are here today. So thank you so much. Well, why don't you just start off by talking a little bit about you and kind of what you're doing and why you reached out to want to be on the podcast and share your story with other parents.
Sure. Well, I am Kat Harrison. I am a children's book author of Surgery on Sunday, as well as the newly released Migraine and Mia. I also am an editor and a writer for adults, primarily in the chronic illness, disability, and mental health space. I think it's important to share my story. I think sometimes when you are a parent and you're going through something and you're in the weeds of it, you wonder what the future looks like for your child. And I think it's really cathartic for me as well to look back on everything I've been through and realize how far I've come. It can be really helpful when I'm having bad days, which happen a lot still.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, you just bring so much value to the table, and I'm so honored to be able to share your story and kind of amplify it for you. So, why don't you take us back to the beginning and kind of just talk about when things started coming up for you and your health?
Sure. So when I was younger, I had a few different ear surgeries, pretty common ones. I had a few sets of tubes, had my tonsils out. And then when I was in elementary school, I started getting bigger holes in my eardrums that required more extenuating circumstances in terms of surgery. But it really began when I was 15. So I was a freshman in high school. I was an athlete. I was a runner and also a soccer player. And I had an ear infection in my right ear that just wouldn't go away. And after many trips to my surgeon, who had done previous surgeries on me, I kept being told, like, it is what it is, like it will go away on its own. I tried different antibiotics and different treatments, and nothing really went away, and it was getting worse. So we decided to do an exploratory surgery. And when I had the surgery, my parents kind of had that dreaded moment where they were pulled aside in the waiting room by my surgeon and his team and basically told that I had a pretty severe bacterial infection that had wormed its way all throughout my skull and also to the top of my brain in the dura. So they asked my parents permission to give me a PICC line, which I then had for 8 weeks. So I was that fun freshman in high school who had a PICC line, covered it up with socks, and administered IV medications to myself 3 times a day.
Wow. What do you remember about being in the hospital at that time? And what do you remember that really helped you?
Oh, so I wasn't in the hospital as long as you think I would have been. I think I was in for probably 3 to 4 days, and it was a blur. I mean, it's funny when you get older and kind of how your memories shape, but the most vivid memories I have are a few things. One, I remember getting a few phone calls on like an actual hospital room telephone, which is pretty old school, shows a little bit how older I am. And I remember just being so thankful that someone reached out to me, even though I was not in a great place physically. I also remember I was at the University of Michigan Peds Hospital at the time, and there was an art cart that went around where patients could choose a piece of art to put in their room. And I remember that, and that gave me a lot of hope. And then my parents, whenever I had surgery, would bring like little travel games of like Monopoly and Scrabble. And I remember playing those while I was I had an IV and a PICC line, and I was pretty miserable, but those little bright spots really got me through.
Wow, that's really good to hear because I think sometimes it can seem like, oh, this is so little, how's it going to help? But to hear that for you, it's one of the standout things, just those little art cart that would come by, games. It actually does make a difference in, and especially your memories and what you go back to when you think of yourself at that time.
Yes, absolutely. I did at the time. They weren't. I was so concentrated on how I was feeling and kind of everything that happened as a result of the surgery and the antibiotics. But now looking back, I'm so happy I have those little diamonds that I can remember. Kind of, it's funny what they mean to you as you get older.
What do you remember about the surgical experience? Did the anesthesia bother you? Did you get worried before surgery? How was the wake up?
So this is interesting. So I've had many surgeries since this particular surgery, and I find that as I get older, I get more anxious for that surgery specifically. It wasn't bad. Before they went in, it was just exploratory, right? So I was feeling okay. I was feeling optimistic. I never really have issues kind of going in and out of anesthesia. I have some funny stories from surgeries that have happened in my 20s and 30s. But that surgery in particular was smooth from the beginning. And then also when I when I woke up, I don't have any particular like bad memories.
I find what you just said to be very true for myself too. Like the older we get, the more anxious we get. And like, I can't, going skiing is a good example. I would have tried anything
Yeah,
in high school. And now I'm like, that's a death trap. Like, not doing that. It's like you just get
I
more
think about
anxious the
this a
older you
lot.
get.
You do. And I think about this a lot because I wonder why. Because between the years of 2016 and 2018, I had four major surgeries, which took me out of work for a long time and kind of reset my life in a very different direction. And I think of like, why is it harder each time? And for me, I think it's because you just have more world context. Like, what can go wrong. You're in a different season of life with different relationships and different support systems. It's also just harder on the body as you get older, especially the more and more you have surgeries. So that's like my wisdom for why it gets harder.
And then I have one more question about kind of the PICC line that you were talking about. And, it's
Yeah.
something visible that's on your body. And obviously, when you're 15 years old, I don't know about you, but I was very cognizant of what I was wearing and what people thought and how they were looking at me. How did you handle that?
Well, I was relatively confident when I was a freshman in high school and an athlete, and I had a decent amount of friends, so it actually wasn't that bad. What was harder for me is when I started experiencing side effects of the antibiotics. And I started wobbling and running into things. I fell into a small creek at my high school. I fell down some stairs in the bleachers, and I think that's when I became really self conscious because you don't know what's happening. People just see you. A PICC line, is still pretty inconspicuous because I had to
Mm.
cover it up with the sock to be hygienic. And so it kind of just looked like an accessory in a way. But when I started experiencing visible symptoms of an invisible trigger, that was really hard.
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so about 6 weeks into the antibiotics, this is like one of my most vivid memories of high school. Is I was sitting at a desk in I think it was a psychology or social studies class, and we were being given a quiz. Sorry, and the quiz was on the desk, but I couldn't see it. To me, in my vision, the quiz looked like it was on the floor. So I started crawling around trying to find it, and my teacher was like, "Kat, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm trying to find my quiz." And he's like, "It's on your desk." And that's when it really hit me that like something's not right. Um, it started taking me very, very long to walk up a flight of stairs. I was having a hard time kind of with my depth perception, figuring out one stair to the next. I stopped being able to cut things like apples. And it was very troublesome and obvious I was having problems. So we went to my infectious disease doctor and then also my surgeon. We explained what was happening, and they said that I was likely experiencing a side effect from the IV antibiotics, but that I was so far in my treatment and the infection wasn't entirely gone that I needed to continue. And by the end of those 8 weeks, eventually we had found out that I had experienced ototoxicity, which is essentially poisoning from an IV antibiotic, and it wiped away my entire vestibular system. And also kind of was the catalyst to having almost a migraine every single day for 18 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Kat. We'll be right back. Incentives work. They work in healthcare and they work with kids. Think about it. If hospitals provide free rides to patients, they show up on time for their doctor's appointments. Teachers use incentives to encourage academic achievement. Hope for Henry unites these truths to ignite the power of incentives to help pediatric patients do the things they need to do to get better. It works every day at hospitals around the country. Child life specialists are trained to use this program, and they're reporting that 58% of their patients don't need sedation for certain procedures, and 95% of their patients are using super rewards and having an overall improved patient experience. Kids at hospitals like the Cleveland Clinic, Inova Children's Hospital, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and so many more are feeling more cooperative, less anxious, and having a better patient experience because of super rewards, a state-of-the-art incentive program. To learn more about Hope for Henry, check out their website at www.hopeforhenry.org and bring super rewards to your hospital. Follow Hope for Henry and contact them through social media at Hope for Henry. So, for those of us who don't know what a vestibular system does and what its role in our body is, can you explain what that is?
Yes, a question I get asked a lot. So your vestibular system is just a fancy word for balance. Your inner ear is really kind of what the ear and like brain connection is what is really responsible for that mechanism. The way I like to describe it is your vestibular system keeps you solid. It keeps you grounded. It's what stabilizes your vision. To me, that was like the biggest like, whoa. When you think about someone losing their balance system, I think wobbling, falling, running into things makes a lot of sense. But what I didn't realize is that it actually is what makes it so I can look at a lamp and see a singular lamp. But because I now have bouncing vision, which is called oscillopsia, everything bounces. So I look at, I'm looking at my computer right now and I see several of them. I've had this for so long that I can tell which is the main computer, but everything bounces. Other fun facts. Your vestibular system is what's responsible for feeling drops on roller coasters, for feeling an elevator going up and down, for feeling speeds in cars. I actually don't feel any of that anymore. I go on a roller coaster, I can sit in the front seat, and the fact that everything's bouncing and I don't feel my stomach drop, I look like a daredevil, but I actually just can't feel it at all.
Wow. My goodness. So it's almost one of those things that I know it's something we all take for granted because we're just so used to it, and to have it stripped away is probably really tough. Do you remember kind of at that beginning stage when you were in high school, what your parents did that may have really helped you? And the reason I'm asking this question is we have a lot of parents who listen and they desperately want to connect with their teenager. So what are some strategies you think that parents could use, or maybe some that worked for your family?
So I think a really big thing is including the child. Even a teen, you would think it seems obvious, that including them in all the decisions and conversations about their care. I think that's really the start of like my self-advocacy journey, really, when I was 15, and recognizing that as the patient, really, no matter how old you are, you have a say. You should have a say in your care, even if it's a younger child. Simply just saying, like, we may have this surgery or we may start this medication. These could possibly happen with these things, obviously in a child appropriate way. But I think having those conversations in the open and not behind closed doors gives the person a lot more validity in their experience. I think the other thing, and this has become so much more apparent kind of in my conversations with my parents as I've gotten older, is like, hey, how is your physical illness affecting how you feel about yourself? How is it affecting, how you feel about others? And I think that mental health and physical illness connection was something my parents really helped me to foster. And I also think something that was really helpful to me is that they didn't always show their fear to me. And I know that kind of seems like the opposite of what I said about being open, but I think that sometimes when you're the patient going through like a harrowing physical journey, someone showing their fear to you all the time feels like an extra burden, right? You feel like you're carrying the illness on top of their feelings. And I think that sometimes kind of maybe not showing that all the time in front of your child, it can be really powerful and helpful to them as well.
Oh, I think that's a really good point. I definitely think there is a sweet spot
Yeah.
between being open and honest about things being scary and fearful and being able to handle it together. And then, you know, like you said, kind of putting that burden on someone else who's already going through something.
Hmm.
Like you really do kind of have to find that line, which can be, it can take work, it can take time for you to kind of find your rhythm. But I totally hear you on that.
Yes, definitely. I think that the sweet spot is where it's at, right? Like you don't want to take things too far, but if you pretend that everything is wonderful, that's also a burden, right? It makes the child or the patient feel like, wow, like is everyone fine with this happening to me? So it's a very gray area, and it's not a perfect science. I think that families, if there is a support system there, you'll learn it. You'll get
Yeah.
into a groove to figure how much is too much emotion, how much is too conversation. It may take a little while.
Right. And who are the people in your life that you can get that vulnerable with? Maybe the child who's going through the illness is not the one to get that vulnerable with. Maybe you can do it with somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm very lucky to have, I used to live in New York and was a magazine editor. And when my health kind of started going downhill again, I moved back closer to family. So I live really close to my parents, and they're very supportive. I have a very supportive partner of 10 years who we've known each other since we were kids, and he's really integral to my entire health experience. And I have a lot of great friends, and because I'm older and have a career, I'm very, very lucky to have coworkers who also have health challenges. And honestly, every day at work, I just openly talk about how I'm physically feeling, and it's been really freeing and healing for me
Oh,
as well.
that's great. Well, when you wrote to me and you told me you have something called SUNCT syndrome, which is 1 to 200
Hmm.
tiny headaches a day. So I
Yes.
imagine you are dealing with pain on a constant basis. What are
Yes.
some of the ways that you cope with pain or you learn to adjust to live with it?
Oh, great question. So yeah, so Sunk syndrome, just to kind of back out a little bit, I was only diagnosed a few years ago. Because I have a migraine almost every day, I'm very, very used to like the different shades of having a migraine. And I knew that I was experiencing something different because everything I do to control my migraine pain, or at least control it to the extent, wasn't helping. And so when I started having Sunk, it's a whole different ball game. I actually really truly haven't figured out how to manage that in particular. But in terms of, I guess, constant pain, this is not going to sound fun, but I've had to make a lot of sacrifices and a lot of lifestyle changes that have honestly really helped. So even though I'm older, so one thing is that I work from home. That's pretty much what I have to do now. On the weekends, I try not to schedule anything, which is really helped. But I think in terms of like actual physical pain, I have an ice hat, which is really helpful. You just pop it in the freezer. I got it off of Amazon. There are a bunch of different versions. I think other things, dark rooms, really help me to manage my pain. In terms of emotionally manage my pain, honestly, just sharing my story. Like this is very healing to me. Having this conversation, it makes me feel less embarrassed, I think. I'm definitely at a point in my life where my friends are having different journeys than I am, starting families, going on lots of vacations, well, COVID aside. And that's hard for me. But sharing my story is healing, even if it doesn't take the pain away.
Well, I'm glad that it's healing for you because it's inspiring and giving strength to those of us who are getting to listen to it. So thank you so much for sharing it. I would love to kind of go back to you. If you could tell yourself, when you were 15 years old, if you could give yourself any advice, what would you say?
I love this question. So again, this is not happy, but I think it's very important advice is I would tell myself that life's going to be hard. And I say that because I'm a really big fan of like, so toxic positivity is very much a thing, especially in the physical illness world. I mean, even in the mental health sphere, this idea that like, oh, just be happy, like everything's fine, you're happy to be alive. And that's really hard to hear, I think, when you are in a ton of physical pain. So I would tell myself that life is going to be hard, but I would also say that life is going to be worth it, that there is going to be a lot of things that will bring you joy, that your story will have purpose, that you'll continue to live a fulfilling life, even though it looks very different. And I would also tell myself that, like, because it's something that I can mentally handle, that like I have, not that I have a responsibility, but I do have a place where like telling my story helps other people who may not be in a spot in life to tell theirs feel a little less alone. And I think I wish my younger self would have known that like there would be a way to recover, that wouldn't make it so hard all the time.
Yeah. And what do you think has helped you the most? Have you been able to connect with other people who don't have a vestibular system like you do? And what is it like to talk to someone who's like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, so that would actually, I'm really glad you brought that up. That was something I didn't mention when I talked about kind of the ways my parents have helped me. So when I was, my case in terms of like figuring out if I did lose my vestibular system was pretty cut and dry. Like I did all the testing and it was really obvious that it was completely gone. And so my parents did a lot of research and they connected me with a group called Wobblers Anonymous, which is why I use the wobbler term with really endearing like love. I don't really think they exist anymore. And the reason I say I don't think they exist is because, quite frankly, they were all significantly older than I was. It's very rare. The antibiotic that I was given really isn't given out a ton anymore because of the side effects. But it also tends to be applied later in life. So I connected with all these people who are like in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s. And even though they couldn't tell me things like, oh, this is what it was like when I was in high school. It was really validating to hear like the struggles that they had. So that was really like, that was a pivotal moment, I think. And allowed me just to kind of get my head around things a little bit, because when it's so rare and no one you know is experiencing it, that was really powerful. But when I was older, so I went through college and kind of my latter part of my 20s, literally not meeting anyone with chronic illness. And I didn't realize how isolating it was until I started talking to people with chronic illness. And this is like wild, but Instagram is an amazing place for people that live with illness. Connected with people who share my diagnoses. People make posts that are just really, really relatable. And that's how it kind of led me to the Mighty, which is where I work now. And I help connect other people who live with the same diagnoses. And that has been so crucial for my journey. Just to hear that someone gets it, I don't really think that there's anything like that can't be replaced. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, I agree. Totally. Well, tell us how we can follow along with you and read some of the content that you're writing and just continue to follow your story.
Sure. So my website is catwritesforyou.com, K-A-T, how you spell my name. And then probably most active on Instagram, my handle is XOCat, which is pretty easy to remember. I share a mix of things about my books, but also just about what I'm going through. Funny enough, if you live with chronic illness, you still have to live with it, which means that sometimes I don't post as much as I want. But that's really the best place to find me and follow along.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so, so much for being here and sharing so much. And I look forward to be able to share your book and kind of just talk and I've read it before. I think it's just so awesome. And Kat, thanks so much for being here.
Yes, my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.